I remember getting my first MIDI controller. It was an M-Audio Axiom, but back then there were really only two options that everyone had. It was the Axiom or the Evolution E-keys if you wanted the larger keyboard but no pads and fun stuff to work with. Nowadays there are hundreds of different options on the market, making it much harder to process and choose and figure out what the best option is. And well, I can't provide a solution to absolutely everything, but I can tell you what I've got experience with. And looking at the MK3 Essential, well, about 18 months ago now, I did a deep dive into that keyboard and why it's really useful. If you're considering between the two here, well, it will be a good place to start in going through that. But in today's video, we're going to take the Arturia MK3 Essential and the MK3 Keylab, put them side by side and figure out which one is going to be best for you in terms of, well, the functionality, what you need out of it, what you won't necessarily need out of it, and the big one, is it worth that extra cost for you to go over to the Keylab, or will you be more than satisfied with working with the Essential? So let's look at some quick pros of the Keylab. We've got a larger display, giving us more context and more information without having to go through as many menus. We have more detailed rotary controls that allow us to simply touch to know what we're controlling. We have an extra bank of pads, which are both velocity and aftertouch sensitive. Our keyboard also supports aftertouch for performance aspects of specific libraries, especially strings. Some pros of the Essential would be, well, firstly, it's significantly cheaper. It is lighter and more ergonomic to move around, especially if you work as a performing musician and use it in that kind of capacity. Functionality wise, it does 99% of everything the Keylab can do, just in a more compact system. So some cons of the Keylab would be, well, the price. It is way more expensive than the Essential. It is a lot heavier, so if you wanted to move it around, that is less ideal, especially if you're carrying it on your back to a gig, for example. And some cons of the Essential would be the monochrome screen, which doesn't allow us to see everything at once and requires some skipping through menus, the less tangible physical controls, and the fact that we have less pads. Also, aftertouch is only available to us on those 8 pads. So there's just a quick pros and cons list, but let's now dive deeper into the feature set of both. I think before we get into the hard facts of this one does this and this one doesn't do this or whatever, let's talk about my perspective on the two things. I used the Essential for about 18 months before putting the Keylab just down here. And my experience between the two in terms of its overall quality and how it feels to play is basically night and day. But I'll put a caveat on that. I sit here in this space for something between 25 to 35 hours every single week and play on these keys. So for me, that is a massive step in the right direction. And speaking of writing and working on music for a living, you need to be able to distribute your music and get it out to all those major platforms easily, and for that I use the channel sponsor, which is DistroKid. They let me get my music out to all of the major distributors, and they do that at a price an independent artist can easily afford. If you're ready to get your music or beats out there and want to release an unlimited amount of music each year, check the link in the description below for a discount off of your first year of unlimited distribution with DistroKid. In having something that feels sturdy and solid and more clickable, meaning without really looking at the keyboard, once I'm familiar with it, I can press a key, know what it's done, hear it, feel it, and get that tactile feedback. Arturia themselves go on about real wooden sides, and well, honestly, real wooden sides? Who the hell cares unless you're playing on a stage and you want to show off the side of your keyboard with its gleaming piece of wood. The Keylab feels sturdier, it feels stronger, it feels more tactile. The Essential, on the other hand, has these push-in buttons that you can kind of press and move and wiggle a little bit, but they do their function perfectly well. And if you're looking down and you're playing on this for a couple of hours a week, you are not gonna notice, feel, or ever concern yourself with such a difference. The way the keys feel is pretty significant though. If you're playing chords and you're listening to what you're doing and you're not so much as learning your way around a keyboard, the Keylab feels incredibly better. And it's relatively simple as why it's doing it. It's not as if the keys are magically made out of a better material. They're just seated differently. When they press down, there is a nice cushion underneath them so that they press and they feel comfortable, and they've got that, again, tactile feedback. Sticking with talking about the keybed, on the Essential it's velocity keynote responsive. Wow, that's a big mouthful. What does that mean? It means on some instruments when you release, it gives a velocity trigger for a release note on some instruments. String libraries are great for this, so it has a little tail off, or some piano libraries as well will have a tail off on the note when it releases. That is the extent of what it does though in terms of the keybed. It goes a little further on the Keylab in that we have channel sensitive aftertouch. What does aftertouch really do? Well, it's kind of like a overall control. Let's say you press down your chord and you release it slightly and press it down again. You can ebb and flow that sound, moving it up and down, rather than just when you pull it away, you get that release tone. Now this is per channel, so if you press a chord, it's going to be the overall channel, not per note. However, there's very few instruments that go as deep as to let you do it per note. The very high-end string libraries are the only ones I'm really familiar with. Now, the Essential isn't completely lost for aftertouch, however. If you do want to do this kind of thing, the pads that are available on it actually do support aftertouch. So you can press those, trigger those, set them to the keys that you want, and use those for your aftertouch performance if you like. And sequentially, the Keylab, which has an extra 4 pads, they are all aftertouch sensitive as well. So you are able to perform this same niche feature that you might need sometimes with the Essential, just in a different way, utilizing a different part. It's not there in the keybed. Now, since we've talked about the pads should be the same, right? However, they feel a little bit nicer on the Keylab, maybe because it was developed later. They've changed the feel of them. They feel a little bit more silky and smooth. However, to play them, tap them and actually hammer something out on them, that feels relatively the same. It's just the actual texture and feel. It's a little softer, kind of like you're touching velvet versus touching cotton. Let's talk about the rotary encoders. They're nice on the Essential, they're really quite useful, and you can switch between using them to control your DAW or controlling the plugin that you're currently working on, which you can navigate around using the Essential as well as you can the Keylab. The difference here being on the Essential, you have to actually tweak and move the knob a little bit to get any kind of readout of what it's doing. Keylab, on the other hand, they're touch sensitive, so you can just tap the top of it lightly. It will realize you're touching that particular control, and it will then display to you what that's currently linked to. So if you're looking for your cutoff, you can just tap across them and find the one that's cut off and then tweak the parameter you're after. The Essential, you'd have to give a little tweak to each one and try and reset it back to where you were each time, which is a downfall, but again, the price difference, and this is where that money is going. It's a similar story with the fader encoders. They're a little bit less accurate on the Essential, and this is just due to the overall travel distance they have. You can dial in just the same as you would, but it's just a little harder, a little bit more fiddly. I will say the feel of them on the Keylab compared to my Essential is a lot stiffer. I don't know if this is because it's newer, but it feels like there's a lot more resistance. You can't accidentally knock a fader and it move, which happens on my Essential, but it has been used for the last 18 months. If this is something you're curious about, and this video is now a year old, leave a comment below and I will tell you if that has adjusted at all. But it just feels like they're a lot stiffer, and well, you get that kind of inertia that's required to move them and adjust them, so you can't accidentally change parameters as easily. Now, this is a subtle one that I didn't realize that I would notice as much as I do, and it's the pitch bend and modulation wheel being rigid metal versus plastic. Again, you get more tactile and a descriptive feedback when using these metal controllers, which is likely why Arturia have chosen to put them in there. They don't function any different, they don't do anything any better. It is purely a integration of me feeling like I'm more in control with the machine when I'm touching these and performing with these over the plastic. However, again, with the Essential, it is essential. If you want to put your pitch wheel and modulation wheel in control, you can, and it works perfectly fine. There's just a little bit more feedback and connection with these metal encoders from my perspective. Now let's talk about the display control. It's much nicer on the Keylab. We have a really detailed, larger LCD display. And while functionality, again, is exactly the same between the two, you can do pretty much everything that the Keylab can do on the Essential. Except because you have that larger display, you have more contextual key controls with having 4 across the top and 4 across the bottom on the Keylab. So you're able to do and dial in things a little bit quicker. And again, you've got that tactile feedback that you can click something and know that you've immediately done it, rather than the click and hold, move around and navigate. You've got a larger display to give you more information at once, rather than having to tab between different windows. Again though, functionality wise, you can still do it all on the Essential. And in case you're not familiar with either keyboard, we have some fantastically useful built-in functionality, especially nice for live performance if you're maybe prone to making the odd mistake. We can do things like lock the key of the keyboard, meaning if you were to mispress a key, well, it's going to assign it to the nearest one that's relevant to the key structure you've chosen. Now we can utilize that with chord playing as well, whereas we're able to program in different chord structures to be triggered, meaning we can play our own chords as we like and then control them with just say the 12 or 6 or 4 notes that we want. So we've played our chords in, we can then just control each one with a single press, allowing us to play those chord structures out really simply with one hand while playing a melody with another. Really useful for recording out MIDI and multiple instruments as well, if you want to redo those chords over and over. There's an extra little bit of functionality in the Keylab in that we can introduce things like strum, which is like a flam, right inside the keyboard, meaning when we press, we immediately get a more randomized, humanized feel. And if we're recording that into our DAW, that translates out as well. That's a really nice touch for when you want to have split keyboard performances that are allowing us to play a set of chords on one keyboard and then a melody up on the right hand. It simplifies things, keeps us in key, but also keeps it nicely humanized. I would love to say that I'm talented enough to always play everything correctly on the keyboard, but that's not where I come in. I do sound design, synthesis and, well, sampling. So I'm competent enough on the keys, but tools like this that allow me to not make mistakes consistently once I've figured everything out are fantastic in my opinion, and really great if you are a hobbyist just looking to develop and build out more of your creativity. Again, the Essential does 99% of this, just with a smaller, more fiddly display, but you can still get the functionality and workflow without the extra spend. And the other feature we've got in there is a built-in arpeggiation. This can be really useful for a number of things. If you wanted to just set it to 1/4 to hold down and trigger a hi-hat while you drum something in, to use that as a quick metronome, super useful. If you want to ARP through a really complex chord, it allows us to do that as well. So multi-mode ARP, allowing us to do a whole host of different things. Honestly, I could do a deep dive into the key scaling, chords and ARP in a whole separate video. And if that's of interest to you, let me know below and I'll actually look to do that. The software integration of things. Well, both integrate really well with all of Arturia's instruments, as you would expect, and both come with Analog Lab, giving you a massive suite of sounds to work with, and they sync up and work with that perfectly. But when we look back at the other things like the touch controls, the extra adjusting of the faders, having 4 extra pads, all of those things do come in as a benefit with the Keylab, but by no means is it 100% better than anything else. The Essential, again, will let us do all of these things. We can play our keys, we can control with our pads, we can adjust and tweak parameters with our controls. We're just lacking that ability to tap and know immediately what control we're linked to. We have to tweak it to see. In terms of integration with DAW, I personally use Logic. Both integrate very, very well. But software integration, allowing us to navigate around our DAW, control pan and faders, switch to plugin mode and control the dedicated plugin, open the plugin without having to go into the menus of Logic and click on it. All very useful and all completely the same on the Keylab and Essential. They're just controls in slightly different locations. We've got a couple of extra buttons available to us on the Keylab for some more shortcuts. And one other thing to note about the Essential versus the Keylab, sure, the build quality is sturdier and more rigid and feels more premium, but the Essential is way easier to move about if you're gigging or to just generally take out of your setup and put back into your setup, because it's lightweight and just way easier to move around. The actual weight difference feels pretty significant, and if you were having to carry this to a gig, you would notice the difference. So who do I think each is for? I think Keylab is for someone like me who spends a lot of time, perhaps at a professional capacity or every evening in a hobby capacity, working on music and utilizing a MIDI keyboard. I think it's for someone who wants to keep it in a studio or home studio environment and who really appreciates having that tactile immediate feedback without having to necessarily look at the keyboard, and works with familiarity of being able to just reach down and know where something would be, having it click and feel that tactile feedback and know it's happened, rather than having to look and hunt at the keyboard. I feel the Essential is probably the perfect keyboard for the hobbyist or the beginner, someone who's just getting into music production or maybe electronic music production and wants to be able to utilize features like having the keys automatically correct if they make a mistake, or help them in creating chords once they've built them out, be able to play them back easily just using 3 or 4 keys themselves rather than having to remember the whole chord structure. I think it's perfect for a traveling musician who maybe plays synths out live and needs a nice long keyboard that doesn't have a whole set of controls and buttons, but will just be quick, easy to set up. They can put it on their backpack. It's nice and light and efficient. Obviously, the cost factor plays massively into the whole thing. If that's been helpful for you, please do throw a like on the video. I've really enjoyed making this and comparing these. And like I say, I used the Essential in this kind of capacity for 1.5 years with nary a complaint. It's not until I upgraded that I really realized what I was missing. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it's been helpful. I do look forward to seeing you in future videos. So please subscribe to the channel. Take care.